Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is a whole new level of cuckoo cocoon crazy, the likes of which we have never seen on Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If deep dives aren't your thing, then don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. This week we have a brand new addition to the Vinyl Monday verse. I don't even think I've tangentially mentioned this group in another video. This is the very first time I'm talking about them. No better time than the present, and no better place to jump in than the deep end. This week, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post hints to next week's episode, I make announcements, I host polls, you can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written version of this review on my website, linked in the description. Alright, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a repress from 1982. I got mine off Discogs. It's got the white Atco labels. Kind of weird to see those labels white and kind of geometric, 80s-ified. I'm so used to the yellow label from all my friggin' copies of Layla. Kind of like the green, palm tree, and white labels Warner used. Now, if I had a nickel for every time a very famous artist created a great cover with terrible text layout for a famous prog band in 1974, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's pretty unfortunate that it had to happen twice. The Lamb cover is by Hypnosis, Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell, perhaps best known for their work for Pink Floyd. The Lamb cover, great design, great. Love the concept. I love how our main character has removed himself from the story and is observing it from afar. The lyrics mention this dissociation a few times, but I hate the text. It's giving Taco Bell in the 1990s. This logo has nothing to do with the rest of the design or the album itself. I love mint green and baby pink, but for the love of God, not here. Just remove the text and it's a great cover. Or even do it like it was done on the back cover with this nice grayscale. It's a lot more cohesive. Don't worry, we will be getting to the gatefold later. On The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, we have the classic era lineup of Genesis, fronted by Mr. Reverse Mohawk himself, Peter Gabriel. Steve Hackett on guitar, Tony Banks on keys, Mike Rutherford on bass and 12-string guitar, and on drums, our special guest on this record is Brian Eno, providing, quote, Enosification, basically wacky effects shit. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was produced by John Burns with Genesis. Roll transition. Before we kick this chapter of the video off, I want to say a huge thank you to the Genesis archive online. I've been having a really hard time researching videos since the Internet Archive went down. A lot of archived web pages and scans of old articles are just gone. So fan projects like this, old school forums, even the fucking subreddits are so important right now. On to the beginning of our story in May of 1974, when Genesis concludes their Selling England by the Pound tour in New York. At some point, perhaps in New York, perhaps not, Peter Gabriel attends a screening of El Topo. I can assure you that the only reason anybody remembers El Topo now is because of this album, not for the quality of the film. The gritty cityscape of New York, combined with El Topo's bizarre Western imagery, including caves, cages, castration, oh my, a raven, and you guessed it, a lamb, all inspired Peter to think outside the British box. He was just touring Selling England by the Pound after all. Peter had the idea for something on this tour, but no clear ideas. Just like the lamb in his story, New York York was the catalyst for this big idea. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was born. Now, the last rock opera we covered on this series, The Who's Tommy, famously has no official plot summary. The Lamb does. And it's printed in the gatefold in excruciating detail. Buckle up, f***os. This is the story of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. A young man named Rael sees, well, a lamb lying down on Broadway. Wouldn't you know it? Spoiler alert, this is the first and last time we ever hear of this lamb. Suddenly, a dark cloud appears, transforming into a screen which swallows up Rael. When he wakes up, he finds himself trapped in a cave and a rock formation. Within this cave, he sees his brother John and calls out to him, but John doesn't respond. Suddenly, Rael is in a factory watching a parade of people go through the assembly line. He sees John as well as his friends. But instead of running to them, Rael escapes. He has flashbacks of escaping a gang in New York and his very awkward first sexual experience. It seems he falls asleep again as he has a nightmare of something removing his heart and shaving it. Rael wakes up, runs to a carpeted hallway filled with people crawling to the door, but those people never seem to move. Rael runs again to a chamber with 32 doors. Once again, it's filled with people he knows. His mother and father are there to guide him, but no direction seems like the right one to take. Lily White Lilith appears to guide Rael out of the room, but he's once again trapped in a cave. Death arrives to put Rael to sleep, but he somehow survives and escapes to a pool with 3 lamia. Ancient Greek part snake cannibal ladies. Rael has an orgy with them, then eats their corpses! Rael encounters the Slipper Men, hideous, deformed men who have also slept with the lamia. Rael finds John, who knows how to escape the Slipper Men's fate. The cure is castration, apparently. They visit a doctor where that happens, but then a raven steals Rael's penis and drops it in the river. You can't make this shit up. Well, actually you can, because Peter Gabriel did it, but on with the story. Who is also in the river? John. He's drowning, but at the same time, the portal back to New York opens. Rael has to make a choice. Either save himself or save his brother. He chooses John, but as this underworld dissolves around them, both brothers' fates are left unclear. In case you were wondering, yes, Peter was aware of how particularly uninvolved the lamb was with the rest of the story. Quote, "The lamb isn't a symbol, so I was a bit worried about the title. He's a catalyst for peculiarities that take place. The result is experiences Rael wouldn't be expected to go through because he's the least likely person to fall into all of this pansy claptrap." A running theme of today's story will be right idea, wrong time. Or maybe right idea, wrong timing. Because the lamb hadn't fully taken shape when the guys started working on it. Most of the lamb material was worked out at Headley Grange. This is a very significant location in Led Zeppelin lore. But this was not the pretty pastoral Headley Grange of Zeppelin days, no. Sometime in the last 3 years, a colony of rats had taken up residence. Rats! No one is happy to be there. Peter insisted upon writing all the lyrics while Steve, Tony, Mike, and Phil worked on the music. The problem was, 4 guys could work on music a whole lot faster than 1 guy could write lyrics. Phil said, quote, "Peter does not work fast. In the best of words." Peter's focus was divided too. Smack in the middle of rehearsals, he pieces out to go write a screenplay with Exorcist director William Friedkin. This whole story is so random. This was frustrating as hell for the guys. Peter said, quote, "We've always been scared of double LPs, but this one won't be just padding. The temptation has been to keep going back and remixing tracks, but now time has run out." So basically, he got the whole of Genesis into this double album mess, and now he's abandoned ship. This project came at a bad time for Peter's personal life as well, so I'm a little lenient on him. His wife was heavily pregnant at the time. Headley Grange was quite far away from home in London, and Headley Grange didn't have a phone, so he'd either be leaving to go home or bringing comically fat rolls of coins down to the phone booth to spend absurd amounts of time there. Meanwhile, Steve and his first wife are going through a divorce with a newborn baby. It sounds like she gave birth and they immediately split up. This affects Steve's involvement with the whole Lamb project. Despite the setbacks, the guys record 6 hours of tape at Headley Grange. It's really cool to hear how this material evolved as the Lamb came into focus. You can tell exactly what they sped up, slowed down, stretched out, and cut out to fill 2 discs. If you want to hear exactly how this thing came together from Headley Grange and what a single LP Lamb might look like, I highly recommend Rael's prog rock documentaries video on this album. He also suffered through El Topo. Things are complicated further when Genesis moves the operation to Glasspent Manor in Wales. They borrow Island's mobile unit to record, but during all of this, Peter's wife gives birth. There are complications, so now Peter's going back and forth from London to fucking Wales. Now this causes some friction which Phil Collins doesn't seem to remember. On the one hand, the guys weren't happy at all about these constant interruptions. It was getting down to the wire and they were still pretty sore over the Friedkin thing. But on the other hand, this is Family Matters, a literal family emergency. Peter was really hurt by the guys' lack of support right now. The album finally starts to come together at Island Studios in London. Carpet Crawlers and Lifeless Packaging were very late additions. Yes, Peter was still trying to write lyrics with mere weeks left until the deadline. I've heard the guys had to wrestle away The Light Dies Down on Broadway and some other songs away from Peter to get the damn things written. Now, who happened to be at Island the same time as Genesis but Brian Eno, working on Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. He agreed to do some work for In the Cage and Lifeless Packaging in exchange for Phil Collins drumming on Mother Whale Eyeless. Phil oversaw the mix of Lamb in marathon overnight sessions just to get this shit out in time. Quote, "I'd be mixing and dubbing all night, and then Tony and Mike would come in and remix what I'd done because I'd lost all sense of normality by that point." In a pretty unorthodox move, the guys considered splitting Lamb into 2 single albums released 6 months apart just to buy Peter some time. But it was way too late. It was time to send it off to the presses. This is what they had to go with. The track listing of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the title track, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, followed by Fly on a Windshield, then Broadway Melody of 1974, next Cuckoo Cocoon, then In the Cage, and side 1 closes with The Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging. Opening up side 2, we have Back in New York City, followed by Hairless Heart, then Counting Out Time, next The Carpet Crawlers, and disc 1 closes with The Chamber of 32 Doors. Opening up disc 2, we have Lily White Lilith, followed by The Waiting Room, then Anyway, next Here Comes the Supernatural Anesthetist, then The Lamia, and side 3 closes with Silent Sorrow in Empty Boats. Opening up side 4, we have The Colony of Slippermen, including The Arrival, A Visit to the Doctor, and The Raven. Then Ravine, followed by The Light Dies Down on Broadway. Next, Riding the Scree, then In the Rapids, and the album closes with It. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was released on November 22nd, 1974, 50 years ago this week. 2 singles were released, Counting Out Time and Carpet Crawlers, but both failed to chart. This was kind of a letdown, seeing as Genesis spent 7 years trying to make a charting single and have only managed to do it once at this point. Nonetheless, a massive tour through Europe, the US, and Canada was planned. The album itself did pretty well. It broke the top 50 here in the States, top 20 in Canada and Italy, top 10 in the UK, and was a number 1 in France. But otherwise, Lamb's release was embattled. Right out of the gate, reviews were Melody Maker and NME reviewed the album well, but the singles got trashed. The guys feared inevitable comparisons to The Who. They'd released Quadrophenia the year before and were actively making a Tommy movie adaptation, which turned out to be really, really bad. So both of their rock operas are at the forefront of people's minds. And through the mid-1970s, we see a number of circumstances that put prog thoroughly out of fashion. These bands were seen as out of touch, part of the establishment. Peter Gabriel's then wife happened to be the daughter of a baron who happened to be the secretary to the Queen. Yeah, few things more establishment than that. I go much deeper into all of this in the Animals episode, as it's honestly more relevant to how that album came to be. Floyd were really the exception to the prog is dead rule. They'd just released one of the biggest albums of all time the year before. Fripp just broke up King Crimson to avoid taking Red on a world tour and to figure his shit out. I went through that whole mess in the Red episode. Rick Wakeman's just left Yes, so their future is unclear. ELP did well with brain salad surgery, but they're on hiatus because of tax trouble. When you take all of this into account, something so outlandish as The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, with so few of its mellotron playing, cape-wearing peers surrounding it was seen as prog jumping the shark. Peter had something really interesting to say to the NME about critics' treatment of prog. I'd like to share it with you guys to give you some perspective on how the musicians felt. Quote, "It's obvious to me that there's a lot more to music criticism than criticizing music. The elevation of rock journalists to superstars," come on now, don't flatter me, proves that. But this concept of the musical elite isn't accurate. Once they hear a mellotron, they close up. Finished. What is also going on at the time of Lamb's release? Genesis's tour plans are about to go to hell in a handbasket. Steve cut his hand pretty bad and needed surgery to fix his severed tendons. With just a weekend to go before opening tour with a sold-out gig at the Empire Pool, it was too late to hire a replacement. They had to postpone the whole European leg until spring and lost a ton of money in the process. To add insult to injury, just days before the Melody Maker interview meant to promote the tour but now serving as an apology for postponing said tour, Peter found out the name Rael was used by who else? The Who. Tour did go on, beginning instead in Chicago on November 20th, 2 days before the album came out. Taking a page from The Who's book, Genesis played the whole damn album live every night for over 100 gigs. Phil had the largest drum kit he'd ever had with Genesis. He loved playing the material live, especially stuff like Waiting Room and Riding the Scree. The guys took the opportunity to stretch and manipulate songs the way they hadn't on record. Quote, "I felt like I was a real drummer on that. I wasn't interested in anything else. I put everything into it as a drummer. It was more adventurous than now, maybe." Now, the original concept for the tour was, I don't even know how this would work, a 3D show. Peter said, quote, "It would be fun to see them all wearing glasses. Something for us to watch." But this was way too expensive. Instead, like Floyd's relationship with Gerald Scarfe a few years later, Genesis teamed up with Jeffrey Shaw. They were supposed to run his projections on 3 different screens, meant to mimic the panels on the album art, but more often than not, they didn't work. There were inflatables and costume changes too. Good lord. I think I need to bleach my eyes. And Peter would give speeches between songs that further fleshed out the story. Here, a second major influence on Lamb was revealed: The Pilgrim's Progress. Amidst the face painting and whatever the hell that was, the band was sitting on a secret. Around the time of Lamb's release, Peter quietly decided this would be his last tour with Genesis. He wanted to go off and explore his inner filmmaker. Spoiler alert, this never happened. But his solo career did pop off in a big way in 1976. The guys kept his departure from the band secret until the tour was over. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of today's story is that somehow the live show was never professionally filmed in full. All we have are about 30 minutes of digitized audience recordings and a few minutes of footage in some documentary. On top of that, no live recording of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway has ever been released in full. No full show has become a live album. It's always been bits and pieces of others. Surely there's gotta be one full show intact. In 1979, Peter began work on a Lamb Lies Down on Broadway film with none other than Yorodowski. For one reason or another, this didn't make it out of pre-production, but considering how famously terrible Tommy's film adaptation was, and how terrible El Topo is, I consider myself lucky that I didn't have to suffer through a Yorodowski's Lamb for this. You know who should be doing a Lamb Lies Down movie? Hello? Guillermo del Toro. Anyway, 50 years later, this album has become quite a divisive release. Either you think it was the greatest album Genesis ever made, or you totally hate it. It's even divisive within the band. Phil likes the music, but not necessarily the story, and Tony wasn't a fan of it at all. So, what do I think of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? Instead of a track-by-track breakdown, there is too much music for that this week. To best address The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, I'll be using my condensed format. I'll talk about what I like, what I dislike, and use specific tracks to flesh those points out where applicable. First, I have to get a bias out of the way, and that is the context of the 80s. The 1980s don't come up much on Vinyl Monday. By then, a lot of the groups I cover had either disbanded, gotten involved in other lesser projects, gotten whacked out on drugs beyond repair, or died. Then you have Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins. Their solo careers were arguably bigger than Genesis ever was. For my first few listens of Lamb, all I heard was this Peter Gabriel. It took some serious effort for me to unravel that context from this one, Genesis. I don't even really consider this the same Peter Gabriel as this Peter Gabriel. That's Peter Gabriel. This is some guy prancing around in silver face paint. Where does The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway succeed? Generally speaking, the first half of this album is great. Musically, I really dig sides 1 and 2. The title track is one of the weakest. It's a shame, seeing as the title track is supposed to be the thesis of the album. Like I said, we do not hear from the Lamb after this. Luckily, things kick into gear with Fly on a Windshield. This is one of those cases on the record where the music conveys exactly the image it wants to. What I think is Mike's Rickenbacker combined with, I believe, the vocal effect on a mellotron. They feel organic, but not, like a Metal Greek chorus. Some odd minimal chords hoist us into the sky before the second half of the song just slams into us. I've never heard a mellotron played in such a way to feel like trudging through mud, but it does with Phil's bombastic entrance and Steve's fantastic solo. The dialogue between these three, Tony, Phil, and Steve, are the best and most exciting part of Fly and Broadway Melody. The shining star of side 1 is In the Cage. It does a similar thing to Fly on a Windshield with its breakdown in the middle, the antsy spiraling keys, and constant stop-start motion of the drums underneath Peter's extended "Get me out of the cage." Feels like trying to stop a speeding train. What a fantastic sense of urgency. We really feel the distress Rael does trapped in this dark cave. We don't just hear "shut me up, lock me tight, lips are dry, throat is dry, feel like burning, stomach churning." We're along for the ride too. Through passages like these, I am astonished by Phil's ability to ride complex time changes like it's no big deal. The lyrics of Lamb are dense, loaded with images we'll be dissecting for decades to come. They create a swirling, melting, Dalí-esque world we stumble through with Rael. It can be too out there for me sometimes, but all of a sudden, you'll hear a line that just jumps right out and smacks you in the face. Like on 32 Chambers, like everyone else, they're pointing, but nowhere feels quite right. Bizarre as Lamb is, it's got some very necessary human moments. Even within obscure-ass images of Howard Hughes in blue suede shoes, cyanide and peach blossoms, stalactites and stalagmites, I just learned what those two were this week, and shaving hearts, Genesis had an uncanny ability to craft memorable melodies. You'd never think Lamb would have a drop of pop sensibility, but once in a while it does. These past couple weeks, I've woken up with something new stuck in my head every morning, even from the songs I don't necessarily love. Counting Out Time.
You're writing the songs I love you. Without you, I would have gone.
Cuckoo Cocoon. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
And the lamb lies down.
Back in New York City is an all-star moment for Tony and Peter. If my love for the Doors is any indication, I seriously appreciate when the keys fill the role that a guitar solo or riff might otherwise. I love this treatment on Peter's voice. It suits his rougher vocal delivery. Never underestimate a white person's ability to get down to Peter Gabriel. Mike gets creative with his bass line, keeping motion under the song as the drama unfolds above. And then there's Carpet Crawlers. Dirty joke aside, this song is genuinely stunning. It's one of the lightest tracks instrumentally, with twinkling keys and a soft glow like a TV screen. It slowly builds, pulsing until Phil's entrance. He drives the back half with a stunted urgence. Peter's subdued, whispering delivery juxtaposed with anthemic group backing vocals. We don't hear of the lamb again, but we do hear of the fleece, the golden fleece, from ancient Greek mythology. Amidst all this obscure imagery of salamanders bursting into flames and mild-mannered supermen held in kryptonite lie maybe the most real and tangible words of these whole 94 minutes. There's no hiding in memory, no room to avoid. We've got to get in to get out. For the Carpet Crawlers, this is the mantra of their trance state, hypnotized by whatever unobtainable thing beckons them. For Rael, and for us, it means that in order to get back to the light, you've got to endure the darkness. Hearing that line for the first time completely caught me off guard. I was bowled over. Within the hellish chaos of Lamb, Carpet Crawlers is refuge. Back in New York City and this are the breadth of the amazing performance Peter gave on this record. He was an underrated vocal talent for sure. I also love Brian Eno's contributions. They're few and far between, but they are more than welcome. You always know when he's dropped in. He brings the atmosphere, making In the Cage feel appropriately cold, and injects these kitschy, wacky vocal effects into lifeless packaging. While I do believe his work influenced Lamb's overall sound, I truly wish we got more of him on this record. He would have given this some intriguing sonic unfamiliarity, that which would have bolstered the surreal, bizarre story. Where does The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway fail? The rock opera is really hard to get right. You need a double album to do it. Double albums are hard to assemble and pace as is. Even the greatest of all time have a few duds in there to fill the space on the record. Then you throw a whole ass narrative with characters, themes, and leitmotifs in there. Tommy runs into problems with pacing. The second act is too short and there's too many ideas going on. Are we following a disabled boy's journey to self-actualization, or are we following a pinball cult? Pete Townsend needed somebody with a red pen. Then we have The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. The exact opposite problem of Tommy. The second act is too long. It's got some nice moments. Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats is very pretty, with light cymbal washes and sparkling keys in dim light. Lamb regains its bearings partway through side 4. Light Lies Down, Riding the Scree in the Rapids, and It have good contrast of rock and electronic, atmospheric, and full sounds. But from Waiting Room through The Raven stealing Rael's dick, Lamb goes off the fucking rails. It tests my patience, and it's evident of the time crunch. Like when a writer knows how their book begins and ends, but hasn't worked out the middle. I think we can all agree that Genesis should have put Lamb on hold until after Peter's daughter was born and after Steve's divorce was finalized. Then everyone would have been settled in enough to hunker down and work for 3 months. Maybe the second act wouldn't be as underbaked as it is. Lamb covers one arc, our Perseus's journey through the labyrinth. More than Tommy can say with all the cult stuff shoehorned in. But given the plot of Lamb is so open, surreal, and outlandish, it might be too much for the music to bear the weight of. I, as the listener, sometimes struggle to envision the story it tells. You can see Mrs. Walker breaking the mirror in your mind's eye. You can see Pink building the wall, but I have a hard time picturing how Rael makes it from New York to the cave. What else is hard to follow? There are no leitmotifs. Aside from The Lamb Lies Down reprise, there are no repeated lines or musical nuggets to associate Rael with. He's obscured both in the story and in the music, particularly removed from the narrative. like on the album cover. Lamb's surrealism is such a double-edged sword. Where I struggle in some parts, I find merit in how open to interpretation the story is. Is it a Christian allegory? Is it a metaphor for the cycle of life? Is it a young man's journey to discovering his sexuality? Or, hear me out, discovering his gender identity. A lot of these really distressing things Rael goes through could be likened to the distresses of gender dysphoria. It is some of the best poppy music on the album, even if the last line kinda ruins it for me, 'cause it's only knock and know all, but I like it. Really? I appreciate Lamb's open ending, though. I personally think Rael dies at the end. The lights only go down on Broadway when a significant performer or director dies, but his fate is totally up to the listener. The weight of this grand story makes some of Lamb's music stick out for all the wrong reasons. The jokes don't quite land. See raindrops keep falling on my head in the cage. The filler is fine for a live setting. It made the second half stronger live than it was on the record, but given how I consumed Lamb 50 years later on record, those passages make great music feel tedious. Around Slipperman, I look at the jacket and go, seriously? There are 6 more songs after this? Point blank, this album is too fucking long. It clocks in at 94 minutes. Daydream Nation is a double album, and it's 20 minutes shorter. The Wall, another double album rock opera, 80 minutes. Lamb makes good music collapse under the weight of this story that could have been so much better developed had Genesis given themselves the time. So what have we learned today? If you're writing a rock opera, get a second opinion, a set of fresh eyes, somebody with a red pen, preferably Bob Ezrin, and you can't rush greatness. For the life of me, I can't find exactly why Genesis were under such a short deadline. Was it because they put the cart before the horse and booked a tour before they were ready? Was it to just get this thing out for holiday album sales? Who knows? From an outside perspective, Lamb's time crunch seems completely preventable and kind of a shame. Once again, right idea, wrong timing. As much as I've bemoaned the lost potential of this album, I do have to remind you that Lamb is not a case of Pete Townsend getting too attached to Tommy and derailing the timeline thing. While the weakest points of Lamb stem from its fate, its very best things are found in the work itself. You can't always say that about a multimedia rock opera experience. Zany as it is, The Lamb is one of the most inspired albums I've ever had on this series. El Topo, The Pilgrim's Progress, Christianity, Ancient Greek Mythology, Jungian Dream Analysis, the coked out writings of Sigmund Freud, even hints of Dante's Inferno. This thing is so radically inspired. It creates a mythology of its own. The writing reflects that. You feel like you're stumbling through a dream. The images shift around you against your will. I'm a sucker for surrealism. It's the kind of art I used to make, and when I'm able to surrender myself to the world of The Lamb, I find it challenges my imagination like no other. While some points were elongated, maybe more than they should have been, there's some really great music in here. Though this isn't so much a unified Genesis as it is Peter Gabriel and everybody else, that is the inherent pitfall of the rock opera. At the end of the day, these are great players illustrating a daring and radical story. Robert Fripp said something along the lines of, if prog wants to survive, it can't keep pretending it's 1969. For better or for worse, Lamb does try to envision a brave new future. If you're looking for a project that exemplifies all of the best and worst things about the rock opera, here it is. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is Dali's Christ with a slash through it, scarred by reality. My personal favorites off this one are Fly on a Windshield, Broadway Melody, In the Cage, Back in New York City, and Carpet Crawlers. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway 50 years later. By the time you're seeing this, I'll be getting my things together to go see Slowdive again. If I had a nickel for every time I put out a rock opera episode before a Slowdive gig, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice, right? What do you think of this album? What do you think of Genesis? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye! Reverse Mohawk home server.